Thank you, Mayor, for this great presentation. That leaves me now the task to be challenge you left open. I'd like to thank Laurent College for its invitation, its board, its committees that gave the opportunity to include this lecture within the 60 public events of the year, and including into the calendar of Barnard. And they gave me so this opportunity to address this daunting title, Psychoanalysis and Our Time, in more or less than an academic hour. In front of a title like this, the first question is, what does our time mean? Maybe the fact that I'm addressing this public in Barnard College is one of the elements of the answer itself. Because if I follow what President of Barnard said, is Deborah Spar, she stated that she had the chance to preside the destiny of an extraordinary generation of young women grappling with new ideals about feminism and new views of women's power and leadership. Unlike their mothers and grandmothers, this generation is accustomed to a world defined by choice. The choice of reproduction, the choice of gender identity, the choice of educational options and careers. That's, without doubt, one element, one crucial element of what our time means. We will live in a world in which new leaders will be made out of this generation of young women. And that will change in a new way the relationship between men and women, and all the gender prerequisites that were supposed to be in the routine, in the tradition, and would be moved deeper. Am I the one better fit to try my hand at the challenge precisely of exploring this new world? Look at me. I'm a white male, over 60, French, ex-president of an international association. All this in New York, it's difficult to assume if one remembers what happened to one of our ex-presidents of the International Monetary Fund. That's why for tonight, at least, I didn't put a tie on. The question of genuine equality for women, said John Scott, the eminent American historian of France, after all the discussions opened by the DSK affair. She said, all this has been deferred since the French Revolution. And now we have a new debate that opened, but at the same time, we must say that the other kind of Strauss-Kahn fatigue in the French and American media that makes this perhaps a little behind us. At least I'm quite happy with that. One other element of what our times means is the fact that also to address an audience in New York about this topic is one element of the answer also. New Yorkers suffered enough to know that the 21st century, 21st century began here on the 1911th as the moving ceremony recorded 20 days ago. One of its legacies is the bizarre state of exception that, like Mark Dennis says in the New York Review of Books, that state of exception that corroded the rule of law in a strange manner. That rule so essential to the American exceptionalism, but also crucial in the building of the European experiment. That state of exception, I quote Dana, is a position at the limit between politics and law, an ambiguous, uncertain, borderline fringe at the intersection of the legal and the political. We are living in a different time, in which broad acceptance of that endlessness of the states of exception, its increasing normalization, are among its distinguishing marks. This state of exception marks something more general, the impotence of norms to face the vast unknown we fear. The American exceptionalism makes it clearer here than anywhere that modern democracies have entered a twilight world in its relation to the law, and we don't know when we will emerge from it. This importance is part of the redefinition of our context. The confidence we had in established fictions is teetering. We have now a whole array of fictions that govern our world that we cannot believe in. Especially these two big fictions that are named dollar and euro, always on the brink of collapse. More for the euro. The question is open: does the euro and Europe have a future? But dollar and euro are linked, like Europe and America. George Soros is right when it says that the euro crisis is a direct consequence of the crash of 2008. When Lehman Brothers founded, the entire financial system began to collapse and had to be put in artificial life support. we are paying for it. The ups and downs of the stock exchange measure the difficulty we have to believe, to trust. And now, the crispation of politics in which the two sides, whether in Europe or the States, accuse themselves of class warfare. Or in Europe, like the Economist said, it's fair ground for hunting the rich. We are closing the era opened in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall that led to Fukuyama well-known illusions announcing the end of history. The gates of the temple of history are reopened again in a new context, in which no one really seems in charge. Psychoanalysis summarized this state of affair, saying that the belief in the father's figure is waning for good. Something else is needed. And the call for strong feminine leaders appear like a symptom of the disbelief in the old ways. A whole new list of feminine world's leaders appear, iron ladies of all sorts, from the mainstreams to the bizarre. Michelle Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Angela Merkel, Martine Aubry, Michel Bachmann. They're symptoms that probably we need to change. We will believe it. Will it be sufficient? Will it be the right sleight of hand to bring back confidence? Nobody really seems to know, and the long-awaited concept that will bring back and restore confidence is running into the contradiction of the master signifier. There is still nowhere from our situation can be read. That defined our times. But the crisis of the father figure, the supposed to know where we will go from here, is a direct introduction to the paradoxes of the psychoanalytic world. Do we really need to have a someone in charge? Do we really need this fiction? Maybe the question of the functional belief, and the idea of being in charge have to be put to question. At least we could say we have science left. The certainty it gives us. Modern democracy only accepts this proof. But science itself has at its core of its process paradox. Scientific and technical progress rapidly renders the organization of daily life obsolete, and for most of us goes way beyond our capacities of comprehension. As such, we narrowly depend more than ever on others, whereas we are ceaselessly affirming our irreducible individuality and our absolute rights to intellectual autonomy. Science becomes every day no more certain or turned towards certainty than ordinary language was. Like science, language is a collective effort. Although we have, all of us, private use of any language, we depend more on the supposed to know, more than knowledge itself. So we are faced with a double movement. On the one hand, crisis in the authority figures, and on the other hand, a new dependence on the subject supposed to know, guarantee of the system of belief. And yet, despite this inguishing incertitude, we will be showing in what sense it is possible to speak in praise of this symbolic deficit. These impasses mean that we are all feeble-minded. It is for this very reason that psychoanalysis and its discourse can come to our aid. And this I rejoin Mayor Janus in its presentation of the drawings, splendid drawing we had announcing the event. We are all students. So let's come to the other element of the title. If we have a rough sketch of what our time means, what does psychoanalysis mean? You have such a lot of way of understanding what psychoanalysis means. As Freud told us, the best way to know what psychoanalysis means is to begin by the experience of dreaming. It can be described as a curious cognitive experience. No one there seems in charge of these chaotic and vivid experiences that assail the dreamer. He can wake up either exhilarated or anguished, forgetful of what the dream was about, or remembering quite neatly fragments of it that usually means something for him, for the dreamer, although the exact meaning remains to be decided, deciphered. We feel that these dreams are ours. That's strange. A recent piece by John Searle, commenting on Antonio Damasio's book on the self, stresses that whatever the cognitive approach, the unconsciousness of the dream introduces us to the paradoxes of conscience. Consciousness comes in degrees, and all range from frantic intensity to just barely being awake. But all of them are degrees within consciousness. There is no such thing as an hybrid form of consciousness. And Damasio insists that wakefulness is essential for conscience, and precisely it is absent in the experience of sleep, in the deep sleep cycles of REM. In a dream, even the simpler ones The dreamer, like Freud said, is in all the places. Let's take, what does that mean? Let's take a very simple dream. A simple child dream. You forbid one 3-year-old child to eat more strawberry cake. And so he dreams at night. Only one word is clear and remains: strawberries. So, yes, it was a delusionary satisfaction of desire. He ate his cake, her cake, during the night. The forbidden fruit has appeared. But at the same time, why did the dreamer choose precisely this forbidden, this magic fruit, and not another one? That brings us back to what happened in Paradise Lost and Eve. At the same time, the dreamer recognizes its object of satisfaction and the place of the one who forbids it. The dreamer, at the same time, is the one that states the rule and the one that breaks the rule. It's the same when we dream of sexual satisfaction. These satisfactions often break the rules or the norms, whatever they are. But they do more than that. They introduce us to a world beyond representation, any representation. Lacan contrasts the dream of consciousness with the world of the dream itself. In the dream, however vivid the perceptions may be, or even on account of the intensity of their distortion, we can say that the dreamer is in all places at once. But at the same time, even the dreamer can say in the dream, this is only a dream. At intuition moments, the dreamer can withdraw from the dream, or dream a little bit further, saying to itself, it's only a dream. But that never implies that the dreamer could say, after all, I am the dream's consciousness. It's a dream does not imply this consequence. As the dreamer is in all the places, he cannot utter an I am, since the dream itself is an I am. I am the dream. The experience of the dream, by its articulation of the visible and invisible, and by the impossibility of this consciousness of being there, is very close to what happens in a sexual encounter. Also, like you said there, it's some kind of Heideggerian experiment with the Dasein. Lacan even said once, in this overture of the Wedekind's Spring Awakening, that boys wouldn't have any kind of relation with girls if they didn't have their dream to guide them. What an absurd declaration it seems. In a proposition during the era of sexual liberation, when he pronounced this in the 60s, at the end of it. And now, today, in the era of hypermodernity, where a little boy watched pornographic film from the age of 12 on, and have access to all the information, nevertheless, whatever the degrees of democratization of pornography, of putting women's bodies in all possible position and garments at the general disposal of the populations, this does not correspond with the experience of sexuality. If it weren't for the dream, there would be no way of placing the two sexes in relation, in abolishing the distance between perception and the dreamer. The dream introduces a world where a possible mingling of bodies can be approached. In the dream, the mode of articulation between jouissance is invisible and the world of representation takes shape. It marks a passage from the invisible to what is informed, said Laurent. At the same time, precisely something that is not the form of the body. John Updike and Martin Amis, two novelists, approached this. Updike, in its classic, elegant, and precise prose, wanted to describe what the sexual experience was beyond any comedy of rules. He had the ability to convey the nature of erotic experience quite special among modern novelists. Martin Amis said two things about him that I like most. One, that Joyce himself said that certain things are too embarrassing to be written down in black and white. Updike was congenially unembarrassing, and we are the beneficiaries of that. He took the novel to another plane of intimacy. And the second thing he said, commenting about the project of his new novel, The Pregnant Widow, he said, I wanted to write sexual memoirs, but this is impossible. Updike tried it. He went into the bed with precision instruments, something like a Japanese crew of high-definition TV. But even with this, it didn't work. The fact that the dreamer loses himself in the experience of the dream has profound meanings for the structure of the symbolic. And consequences that are usually bypassed. When we state that the 20th century was marked by the publication of the interpretation of dreams by Freud, we forget that it was at the same time accompanied by Russell's great forays in logic. Frege, before Russell, just at the end of the 19th century, had allowed for objects as vast as the list of all the lists to be thought through in logical terms. By distinguishing those lists that contain themselves from those that don't, Russell made a variation of the paradox of infinity appear that would generate a whole world, but a world that would be more unstable than anything Frege, conceptual writing, had dreamed of. The logical revolution of the 20th century is described without making the link with the text from Freud and the one from Russell. That's the link that Lacan made. His psychoanalysis tries to make visible the consequences of this linking of the dreamer everywhere and nowhere, and the paradoxes of the infinite. The Freudian subject, read by Lacan, is structured like Russell's set, caught in the fundamental paradox. It will never attain a definite description of the jouissance that's his, a description that would contain it. In a way, it's the reverse of the fixation that the sadomasochistic ceremony aims at, where the subject attempts by any means possible to maintain himself as the consciousness of the experience of jouissance that takes place, to maintain a scenario and accomplish it by having written it right to the last line. In the dream, the dreamer finds himself in the zone of the no one anymore. In French, plus personne. The fabric of the subject, which is just thus produced, is not representation, but its limit, which implies the irreducible of jouissance. Faced with this consonance between the analytic experience, or as the dream is approached within the analytical discourse, and our civilization with its feeling of plus personne. The flaw in the symbolic order appears and deepens. So we have a twofold reaction. A twofold desire has come to light in accordance with the iron law of the superego. On the one hand, we hear an invasive call for security and its corollary, the installation of a society of surveillance with its crazy panoptics, multiplications of machines and of video objectivation. And on the other, we have the fascination for living like a machine, so as to be delivered from the contradiction of civilization, from semblant. We have an implacable logic that takes us from Georges Bataille acéphale to the neuronal man dreamed of by neuroscience, or by some uses of neuroscience. The consequence of this liberation from the relation to the other and its semblant is that the role and the place of the principle of authority in general is undermined, especially in the treatment, in psychoanalysis. We cannot get out of it by increased order, nor by means of pompous semblant. How can psychoanalysis experience can deal with the contemporary egalitarianism with its demands for transparency, with its demands that every step should be explained and precisely defined in any treatment in which the subject is involved. What we can say is precisely that within the analytical discourse, psychoanalysts and psychoanalysm are in a dissymmetric position, but on the same side of being conscious. What are the inventions of Lacan? The fact that he touched to the timing of the analytic session, the so-called short session, the punctuation of the text of the analysis, is to stress that to face the basic flaw of the symbolic order, there is no other satisfaction than the inventions of the dream presents us. We are not and will never be responsible or in charge for what appears, what invents itself within the unconscious texts that go through us. The language is traumatic. It destroys, the language of the unconscious is traumatic. It destroys the illusions of the ego, or the illusions of being in charge. At the same time, the dream, it's not the ultimate word of the psychoanalytic experience. The dream is a delusionary satisfaction of desire. At the same time, the dream itself invents the way in which we can wake up. Within the dream are knotted together at the same time the desire to sleep and the fact that in the dream presents itself a real experience, a new level of intimacy with the traumas that define our most singular experience. The real satisfaction is there. We can see how, in this way, Lacan commented Freud's dream of the Irma's injection. To get out of the labyrinth of its guilt about what happened to his friend Irma, that he had sent to Fleece to have her operated, and the disaster that followed. At the end, Freud sees the formula of the trimethylamine, and Lacan said, for him, it was the discovery of psychoanalysis. There is no other way to get rid of our guilt than the text of the unconscious itself. without any guarantee, without any ideal. What's left is what can be invented there. There is no word beyond the word itself. It's the immanency of the solution that is indicated there. No transcendence, nowhere. Pure immanence. What we want is for the psychoanalysis in our time is an analyst that can occupy this place, not of guiding the subject, but taking the risks of inventing with him according to what's possible in the particular structure of the unconscious of the subject. Calculated risk, of course, but not entirely submitting himself to protective and mortifying prohibition, without, for all that, falling into therapeutic activism. That's how we can guide the subject within the symbolic disorder to the ways in which he can name the traumas that for himself were decisive and were this most defining moments for him. The movements of psychoanalysis is twofold. On the one hand, it authorizes the loosening of the identification with master signifiers, with the ideals the subject comes at the beginning of the analysis. And on the other hand, it allows for a tightening around the whole. For instance, take the example of the subject marked by the scene where he surprises his parents' lovemaking. He retains the memory of an enigmatic phrase from his mother. Come back when the sky is violet. In French, reviens quand le ciel sera violet. The problem is that there is an homophony between the color, violet, and the rape, violet. This subject was left in the labyrinth of these neuroses with an interrogation. What were exactly the relationship between his mother and being raped? Why did she choose that one? The question was more and more insistent after his adolescence and beyond. This conundrum of what exactly was her intention saying that occupied him during a good part of his analysis and led him to sort out the aggressive relationships he had with women. And it appeared like a pure contingency, like a hole in the whole fabric of his unconscious, so at the end could separate himself from that and invent a new kind of relationships, named otherwise. The real in the dream that talked to us has to be acknowledged by the presence and the intervention of the analysts. it has to acknowledge the fact that if no one is in charge, the experience of jouissance is in charge of guiding the subject. And it has to be responsible for its consequences. With no prior judgment, only to be responsible for what was the thing he had to face. That's why the psychoanalytic experience in our times, like before, is critical of all the recognized ideals, of the powers that exist, of those who feel they are in charge. That's why analysts are criticized. In democracy, they are accused of benign neglect, of what should really would be really their social usefulness to their clients. They fall short of social utilitarianism. It's clear that the jouissance and what's useful oppose themselves. Outside democracies, they can be more directly challenged. We see that in the difficulties psychoanalysts have within the Arab world, and at the same time the opportunity they have. In this changing world. You remember that Bernard Lewis made himself the champion of the thesis that the Muslim world would never change. Edward Said challenged him, saying that Muslim in the singular is an invention of the Orientalists of the Western world. The times seem to confirm what Said opposed. The Iranian urban upheaval 2 years ago, on the occasion of the Trump re-election of the president, was followed this year by the Arab Spring due to the demise of obsolete forms of power. New voices could be heard in their diversity. Especially, you could hear testimonies from psychoanalysts in Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt. These days, we have heard of a colleague that has been imprisoned in Syria. These psychoanalysts tell us about the shifts within the tectonic plate of desire within the Muslims' world improved. That's the importance of the last testimony we heard last week of a psychoanalyst who was jailed in Damascus, 66 years old, frail, ill, for doing nothing more than know dynamics on what fear is in a situation of civil strife like the one experimenting Syria. We are concerned not only because it is a humanitarian cause, but also because it is a symptom of how a psychoanalyst at the nexus of multiple causation can be seen as a danger only because he tries to listen to what the fears in a certain context are. and doesn't want to make them silenced. Jacques Miller, the psychoanalyst who edits Lacan seminars, has taken the initiative of a petition that circulates worldwide, with people signing from all walks of life and political walks of life. Right, left, conservative, progressist are interested because it cannot be assigned to a precise cause. This psychoanalyst has a name. Her name is Afranase. And we hope that during the conference that will follow, we will also have signatures of people here in New York, whether students or professors interested in that. In the US, Judith Butler has already signed, and probably others will, not in the West Coast, but in the East Coast. With this symptom, we see how psychoanalysis is about waking from false dreams, false entanglements, bizarre ones, real and imaginary jails. We can be in charge of this goal without being overconfident on the ones supposed to be in charge of the norms, of the gender definition, and or the invention of the new fiction for this century. These fictions are not already written down. We want to see them, and we want to see what will come. Thank you.
Circulating mics. Wait so they can actually hear, so they can. Thank you. Laurent? My question has to do with what you are talking about. The beyond of the representation. You are talking about the dream and the experience of sexuality, I would say more so in the orgasm, right? The forgetting about oneself. What is the status of that representation? Because I was listening a little bit as if what's related with consciousness as and then you talk about sadomasochism with this kind of a will to know or will to be conscious of the act. What is the status of the representation if your sons cannot be represented? So that's a question that I would like, if possible, that you elaborate.
Is there another questions in it, so you can take both, or I will answer this one? Give the time to prepare some more. I have another one already. Please.
I was wondering if you were following the protests on Wall Street, and if you wanted to speak to that and its relation to our times. These massive protests that have been going on for the last few weeks, protesting the economic situation. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that. Also, in the status of protest, I mean, you know, some people like Slavo and Sheffield are saying like it's futile in our time, in a way. Like, indeed, these protesters on Wall Street, they don't know what they want, but it's just. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that.
These protests, so you said there are,
The microphone?
what exactly were the protests towards?
They're on Wall Street, and they're basically, they call themselves the 1%, and they're protesting the economic situation in America right now, where 99% of the wealth is held by like this minority. You know, finally, like, we have middle-class people coming out, pilots, postal workers, people who had job security. They're finally coming out and saying this is unacceptable. Finally.
There are quite different questions. It's true. But in a certain way, both directing the same point. You see why? What I said to the first question is not exactly the experience of orgasm I was pointing out to. It's the experience of dreaming of an erotic dream as such, with or without orgasm. In the experience of the dream, of the erotic dream, you don't have a representation of what's going on. You can be, it's true, at the place of the voyeur and see the whole scene. But you are all the places. The voyeur, the one who experiments, and precisely you're lost in that. There's no cognition of the precise experience. There's always a loss somewhere. And precisely this experience of entanglement with another body, the erotic one, is at the same time autoerotic, but with another body, and without the representation. Orgasm, of course, is the kind of the cut, William Burroughs would say, the real cut. But before that, you have this strange experience that led Laurent to say boys and girls would never sleep together if they didn't have the experience of dreams. Otherwise, they rather would stay on a pornographic experiment. Watch. There, the experience of it gives us an idea of what the erotic world is beyond any possible representation of it, beyond any form, any shape of the bodies. So in that sense, it's prior to the experience of the orgasm that we can feel this punctuated by orgasm, its dissolution of any agency. So, in a way, orgasm confirms, is prepared by the dream itself, is allowed. The notion that what is exactly a social representation has to do with what dreams are. friend Jacques-Alain Miller just published today in a magazine, French magazine called Le Point, a paper in which he develops what he said last week in Paris in the Laurent seminars about that. What's clear, at least in Europe, is that the left has only one policy, one politics: to make us dream of a better world. With its acceptance, at least on the French left, with its acceptance of the rule of the market, its hopes of regulations that never arrived, the ever-developing consequences of the crisis of 2008. We have a dream policy. And he opposes precisely what can be the policy of dreams, formulated best probably by Pierre Rosanvallon, political thinker, who said the left lacks an utopia. Do we really need an utopia, or do we need to wake up? That's something that can be developed. But it's true that if we understand the dreams not as an utopia, in the sense that the utopia that has no place, but as an experiment in which the dreamer is in all the places, and for instance, is not identified with one class, whether middle class, whether the rich, dreaming to be like the rich, and famous, and people. Not dreaming, but being in all the places sufficiently to experiment that the way to wake up is to make himself hear, to protest. To protest the fact that he doesn't have any confidence to the one that are supposed to be in charge of these utopias. The movement that we see now, whether in the United States or in Europe, the Les Indignés, in France, Indignados, Castellano. These movements, urban, middle class, educated, which it's true are similar in that way what happened in the Arab Spring. These movements are probably, we have to help to transform these movements in the sign that something new is waking. And probably that routine politics that define the old ways of separating right from left in Europe and maybe in the United States, the bipartisan standpoint may be perhaps something that has to be overcome. The defining of a new political topos. That's what's at stake, probably in our experience that we'll have in the following years. Psychoanalysis can help. In a way that it will not condone all delusions. So, in a certain way, the two questions were linked. Please.
Yes.
You need a mic.
Yes, thank you. If you said symbolic disorder, then would you explain it? Because I'd like to obtain the concept before I violence to it. Did I hear you? Did you say symbolic disorder earlier?
Can you repeat your question?
I thought that I heard you say symbolic disorder.
Yes.
Right. Then would you explain what you meant a little bit, because I'd like to obtain the concept before I do some violence to it?
Yes, symbolic disorder, meaning that usually the description of our state of civilization, it is described commonly as a disorder. Things are not in place. And people protest. I tried to give some description of it in a way that it shows also that it's a new order that is presenting itself. But at the same time, this new order has to include the fact that there is a fundamental flaw in any symbolic possible order. And that's the real aspect. We will never have a symbolic order as we knew it. But not only as we knew it, what appeared is the fundamental flaw of any possible order. And the symbolic order as such is a kind of illusion. Will that help?
Thank you for taking my question. My question is, I'm wondering how psychoanalysis distinguishes itself or joins with other theories and practices and interventions in the mental health field and the social sciences and beyond, certainly.
One of the always the questions are always linked. Your question is linked with the one just before. Usually, in the